Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Nuba Network. If you're new to the channel, thank you for joining. Today, we're going to go over my Paladin tank and exactly just how I got those stats. The Paladin tank is an easy and a hard tank to play all at the same time. Once you understand its mechanics and once you understand how to resource manage, it becomes a breeze to play. Okay, let's get started. First, let's start with our at-wills. Our primary at-will that we're going to be using is going to be Oathstrike. Oathstrike is going to be our threat generator. This is going to be the attack that you're going to use 90% of the time. For my secondary, I then use Shielding Strike. Shielding Strike is what I use if I need to get some stamina back in a pinch. I don't use it that often, but it is there as a backup option. Instead of using Shielding Strike, you could use Radiant Slam. And what Radiant Slam does is allows you to get into combat a little bit sooner. You got a little bit of a range attack that lunges you forwards. So those are your three options. Primary attack would be Oathstrike for threat generating. Shielding Strike or Radiant Slam would be your alternates. Now, when it comes to our encounters, we have options, and we have plenty of them. First, you can use Smite as a single target hard taunt. You do have to pair Smite with the class feat Divine Challenger, which allows Smite to put you at the top of the threat list. Now, one thing to note, when you use this, it's when you tap it. If you charge Smite, it will not put you at the top of the threat list. It'll just do more damage. So when you get Smite, pair it with Divine Challenger, you tap it, put you at the top of the threat list. You also have Valve Enmity as another hard taunt, but this one is going to be an AoE hard taunt. Smite is going to be your single target hard taunt. And then the third option you have is Templar's Wrath. Templar's Wrath is also a AoE taunt, but it's not a hard taunt. But it does hit pretty hard, and it will put you at the top of the threat list at the beginning of combat. It's not something that will put you at the top in the middle of combat, but it's something that you can use during combat to keep you up at the top. For our dailies, our primary daily is going to be Divine Protector. And again, this is something you're going to use mainly during a tank buster. Now, you'll see later on in the build, we're not going to be using our dailies that often, pretty much only when we're coming up against a tank buster that we cannot survive unless we have our daily. But like I said, Divine Protector is going to be our primary daily and is going to be for us. Now, we're not using this for the 30% awareness because, again, in the build, you'll see we'll have plenty of awareness, but we are using it for the 30% damage reduction. Our secondary daily is going to be Shield of Faith. Now, this daily we're going to be using if we need to mitigate for the team. So this gives the team a 5% damage reduction as well as a 10% incoming healing. Alternatively, you could also use Divine Judgment. You'd use this if you're running the ring or the helmet Manticore's Bite. For our class feats, you also, again, have many options that you could choose from. The one that you cannot stray away from is going to be Divine Challenger. Again, this is what's going to make Smite work the way it is. It's going to make it that hard single target taunt. I'm currently at this moment using Aura of Vengeance, which this just makes it where if I take damage or if my teammates take damage, then I then dish out a 25 magnitude, unless I'm under Divine Champion, which then makes that be a 40 magnitude hit. The other option is if you're having trouble holding aggro, you could then use Aura of Valor, which decreases threat generated by nearby party members by 25%. If you're not that good at managing your resources, you could then also use Composure, which then allows your divinity to recharge 10% faster, and or you could also use Aura of Protection, which increases defense of self and nearby party members by 4%. So you have options depending on how you build and how you play. If you're lacking defense, I would say pull it from here, Aura of Protection. But again, if you're going to copy and paste this build, you won't need it, obviously. If you don't copy and paste this build and just use this as a guide, then this is an option for you. But there's plenty of options. One thing to note is you can only have one aura active at any time. So I can't have like Aura of Protection as well as Aura of Vengeance. It won't work. Again, it won't allow you to do that. You can only have one of those. So that's why you're going to stick with Divine Challenger as your primary and then choose one of the other options that we did mention so far. When it comes to our feat, there's a couple that are really good, and then there's a couple that we just chose due to the fact that it's better than the other option. So our first feat is going to be Sacred Shield. Now, Sacred Shield is going to be one of those that we're choosing just because it's better than the other option, which is Divine Reciprocation, which is for healing, which we don't do really as a tank. We could, but it's not our thing. So we just chose Sacred Shield. Same thing, Burning Vengeance is the same thing as the Sacred Shield. It's better than the Baneful Strike. You could go Baneful Strike. It just gives you a 5% chance when using your at wills to cast Bane by itself without costing any divinity. You would then have to replace one of your encounters to use Bane. It's not bad, but it's not the option that I chose here. Our third one is Justicar's Bulwark. We're going to speak about this here in a little bit once we go over our mechanics a little later on in the video, but this is one of the very important ones. Shield of the Gods is a good one that we're going to choose here because it provides Divine Protector, no longer redirects damage to the nearest ally and instead reduces the damage that's dealt to us. Again, we'll talk about this here in a little bit when we go over the mechanics. And the biggest one that's going to be very important to this build is going to be Intimidating Presence. A lot of tanks like to run the Ring of Tiny Circles, but with this, you don't have to run that ring, which then frees up your ring slot, which you will also see when we get to our gear. But what this does is now increases the threat generated and does a 100 magnitude high threat attack every second to nearby enemies. And I will have some gameplay showing that you'll see me using this. Now, to be a successful Paladin tank, you do have to understand the mechanics here. What Divine Champion does is once activated, increases the effectiveness of your auras on the party members within 30 feet of you while draining divinity over time. It also absorbs 50% of all damage taken up to 40% of our maximum hit points. Damage taken depletes our stamina and our stamina regeneration is reduced. We have a way to slightly mitigate the stamina regeneration reduction by having our Binding Oath and our Shielding Strike. So if we're going to use Divine Champion, we're going to want to pop that Binding Oath and we're going to want to use our secondary at will to keep the stamina up. If you do this, that will allow Divine Champion to be up longer. Added feature to it is then going to be Divine Palisade. So once you hit R1 for my instance, and then you also block, it turns Divine Champion into Divine Palisade. What Divine Palisade does is it raises a Divine Barrier with your shield, absorbing up to 60% of your total maximum hit points. So again, this is going to be something you do during a tank buster, which then will absorb 60% of your hit. Divine Champion is when you're going to want to use, maybe you're just taking a little bit too much damage that you're comfortable with. You'll pop that, you'll absorb 50% of all damage that's taken, as well as you have the added benefit of attacking. We also have Justicar's Charge. Justicar's Charge says it restores divinity whenever you block an attack. Well, we know that block an attack uses our stamina. So we pop Binding Oath with our secondary at will, which generates stamina. They were in Divine Palisade or Justicar's Charge. We have our stamina up. It drops. We pop our stamina regen, which then allows us to stay in there even longer. So I do hope that helps a little bit. It is confusing and it does take some time to learn it. Once you do, though, you will start to realize that the Paladin is actually a very easy tank. But with all our powers and our feats done, let's get to seeing how we're actually built. As always, you might not have exactly what I have, but you probably have something very close to it. You might not have Celestials. Maybe you have rares, uncommons, greens, whatever it is, you guys can make it work. So for my enchantments, I'm running 4 garnets in the offensive slot just to give myself a little bit more power to help myself out with a little bit more threat generation in the utility slot. I'm also using a garnet for some of that forte. In my defensive slot, I have a Celestial Jade for the crit avoidance, a Celestial Opal for awareness and deflection, and then 2 Celestial Cobalts for deflect severity. In my bonus slot, I have Celestial Stamina bonus. In my combat slot, I have Celestial Fortified Nature. And in my overloads, I usually will run something like Unholy Protection for 5% crit avoidance and 5% deflect chance. And then my second one, I would usually do whatever zone I'm in. So if I'm fighting like demons, I'll go with Demon Wards. Or if I'm fighting dragons, I'll go with Dragon Ward. That's usually how I set that up. For my gear, I go all crit avoidance down the left side, and I go all stamina regen down on the right side. For my helmet, I'm running the Enchanted Deathforge Armament. The only downside to this helmet is it takes a full 60 seconds for me to get the full benefit of the stamina regen and awareness. However, it's not necessary for this build. It's more of a buffer. It's more of a extra layer. I have plenty of awareness already. For the chest, I'm going with the Abyss Conquerors Provokers Curious. This is coming from Demon Web Pits Master version. This is a great piece for tanks. I've yet to change off of it. I haven't found a better piece to change off of it with. With this chest piece, you're going to want to try to keep your stamina up as high as possible. So this is also why we're using Binding Oath and our secondary at will, which are both stamina regens. We can keep that stamina up to 100%. We get 7.5 crit avoidance and 7.5 awareness. As it decreases, however, the effect starts to wear off. We start to get less of that. When we're out of stamina completely, then we get a 30% stamina regen for 5 seconds, which puts that on a 30-second cooldown. So that kind of is a seesaw effect with this piece of gear that keeps it up. But I promise you, it is a better pieces than most chest pieces that you can find for tanks. For our arms, we're using the Abyss Conquerors Provoker Gloves, which is coming out of the same zone, which is going to be Master Demon Web Pits. What this does, it gives us 10% awareness and power, but we lose 2.5% movement speed. And movement speed does sound like it's a big negative, but 99% of the time, if you have to move, you're only moving a couple of steps to the left, a couple of steps to the right, or a couple of steps backwards. So it's not going to hurt you a whole lot, but you can't pass up that 10% awareness. For my weapons, I'm running the Zeraxian Battle Hammer. I would like to get the Void Touch. They're almost the same. One is just slightly less. I have the Void Touch offhand, but I don't have the Void Touch main hand, which is something I am working for. But the good thing about this set, which makes it good for tanks, is we get a 5% overall going healing, which that doesn't matter for us. But we also get the 5% damage resistance just naturally. And then if we're in single target, which is boss fights, which is where we want the most damage mitigation, we get a 6% damage reduction as well. And then for my boots, I have the Enchanted Death Force Greaves. These are giving us 3.75% awareness and deflection while at full health, which as a tank, we're not always at 100 for full health, but we are pretty topped off. For our neck and waist, we're going with the Serum Magma set. There are better sets out there. I just chose this one because it was the latest and greatest, but we are getting 2% power, 2% forte, 2% defense. You can go with something else. This is not a make or break piece. For our rings, we're going with the Liquescent Band, which we gain 2% damage resistance based on our missing health. So as we start to lose health, we start to get a little damage resistance. It's nothing major. It's 2%. As you can see, I'm currently at 100% health, so I'm getting 0 damage reduction. But as we start to take damage, we get to mitigate some. So it is what it is. This ring at first glance looks like a healing ring because you see that huge 6K outgoing healing. However, if you look at the bonus for the ring, you gain 8% forte, which is nice, but when action parts are full, you also gain 15% deflect and deflect severity. So my build does go into deflect and deflect severity. Most tanks choose to avoid or neglect deflect and deflect severity, but I managed to find a way to cap out my main stats and then also tap into some deflect and deflect severity. For my shirt, I'm using the Ember Plated shirt. Whenever I'm healed in combat, I gain 5% crit avoidance for 10 seconds with a 20-second cooldown. This is one of the pieces that actually is crucial to me capping out my crit avoidance. Without this, my crit avoidance was capped out at around 83 to 85%, something like that. But with this shirt, I actually get to cap it out at 90. For my pants, I'm running the Dazzling Flare Fiber pants, which whenever my stamina is over 75%, I take 3% less damage. For my artifacts, I'm just running whatever is the best for my stats that I may need at the time, as well as looking into trying to get some stamina regen. My main artifact is a debuff, obviously. For my guild boons, I'm running power in the offense, crit avoidance in defense, and revive sickness for utility. My companion gear, I'm wearing 3 Molten Belt of the Companion and a Celestial Companion enchantment, as well as in the Companion enhancement, I'm running Unflinching Will, which has a chance to increase you and your companion's deflect and deflect severity by 3.8% for 15 seconds. This is a key piece to getting our deflect and deflect severity up, but usually you're going to want to run something for the team. For example, Armor Break, Dual Senses, Pack Tactics, anything of that nature. If your team doesn't need it, you could go with Unflinching Will, like I said, to get your deflect and deflect severity up. For my slaughter companions, I'm running a dual guard discipline for 7.5% crit avoidance, the Raptor for that 18% power for the team, the Undying Overlord for 7.5% reduced incoming damage, which is a big damage mitigation for tanks. For my other universal slaughter, I'm running the Blink Dog's Presence, 3.8 deflect chance and 3.8 crit avoidance. And for my utility slot, I'm running a Moonshade Druid Wisdom for 15,000 maximum hit points and 3.8 crit avoidance. For my mounts, I'm using the Hot Streak for my combat power, and for my equip power, I'm using for 4,500 deflection. Again, this is something you're going to want to use team buff, things like Pack Tactic, Mystic Ore, Runic Ore, anything like that buffs the team. If the team doesn't need it, then yes, you could go with Untouchable to get that 4,500 deflection. For my stable, I'll scroll through these mounts here. You can see my collars, the insignias that I'm using, and the insignia bonuses. Now, my stable is not optimized the best. It could be much better. I have 3 Protectors Covenants there, which I am wasting. I need to go back here and reorganize it to get better stats. But do remember, if you go with 3 Protectors Covenants, you're not getting the full bonus on each one. Each time you use it, you're going to get it half. So, for instance, if the first one gives 100, the second one's going to give 50, and the third one's going to give 25. So just remember, they do stack, but they stack reduced. For my consumables, I'm using a crafted potion of deflection rank 14 to give me 5,000 deflect for 3,600 seconds. The chocolate, which is guild food, give me 20,000 additional hit points and 4,000 additional awareness for 1,800 seconds. Fizzy Brew to increase my movement speed by 10% and my awareness by 5% for 1,800 seconds. And the Elixir of Steadfast Devotion, which gives me 2,000 defense and 5% awareness for 3,600 seconds. Remember, the Elixir and the guild food persist through death, and the chocolate and the potion you do have to reapply anytime you die. This is what my build looks like standing and buffed outside of combat. And these are what my stats look like in combat. Remember, I am in the training room, so the training room does skew the numbers a little bit. These numbers are true. If you remember to the clip I had at the beginning of the video, I was actually in a dungeon and I got these exact same numbers. However, not all the time does the training room act the way it should. The companion I'm using is the Fawn because there is a piece of gear that procs when I get healed. So I have the Fawn acting as my healer doing the healing, but in the dungeon, you would actually have a healer. So there you have it, guys. That's my Paladin build. I do hope this video does help you. Again, the biggest takeaways, the biggest things to learn from this video and go out and practice are the tank mechanics, because they will make or break your build, and your divinity is tied to your big shield. So anytime you're in a palisade and you have your wings out, when that depletes, that is a huge chunk of your crit avoidance. So there's 10% crit avoidance tied up to your wings. So as you let those wings go and that starts to deplete your divinity, you will ultimately end up losing 10%. So you don't want to have that popped up all the time. You technically have 3 shields with your Paladin. You have your baby block, which is just your L3. You have your second block, which is the wings out. And then you have your big block is where you throw your shield up. This is what you use for your tank buster. If you guys have any questions, if you feel like I missed anything, definitely let me know in the comments below. If there are any changes that I make to my build, I will try to update the video with some updated information. But for now, this is my build. These are my stats. Hopefully you guys give it a shot. You've been tuned into the Nooba Network. I've been your host, the one and only, the Nooba Hard, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.